For those of you that have followed this whole Brexit debacle, you will know that there is one name in particular that will come up and crop up continuously in the history of this going forward, and that is, of course, none other than Daniel Hannan, aka the brain of Brexit. This was a guy who was very much always at the forefront of pushing forward and talking about the economic benefits of Brexit and the wonderful opportunities that we would have when we're outside the EU, and then roll around to the referendum. Daniel Hannan was pitched as being the brain of Brexit. If you've got a question, Dan's the man to answer it for you. He is the think of him as like the Wizard of Oz, and you come in, Dorothy, and I'll tell you the question with my gigantic brain-like head to tell you anything you need to know and answer those said questions. But of course, Daniel Hannan, also infamously the guy who went on a live TV interview, and after someone from the Remain side pretty much said, look, a vote to leave means leaving the single market and customs union, Daniel Hannan immediately turns around and says, don't be silly. No one's talking about leaving the single market or customs union. Only a fool would leave the single market. And of course, here we are today with Daniel Hannan championing the fact that we did indeed leave the single market. So the fool, Daniel Hannan, indeed almost certainly has now become through his own words. But like all Brexiteers currently, Brexit is just not going well, and it really isn't. And it's not just because they're not in charge or because it's not going right. It's because Brexit was just a bad idea and a bad mathematical sum. It's to them, and Brexit to Brexiteers, Brexit is 2 + 2 = 5. That is the answer that they want, but it's not. It's far from being right or even correct. But they refuse to acknowledge the realities that the world has moved on, fantasizing about a Britain that had an empire and all this trading power and used gunboat diplomacy to force other countries to accept its trade deals, and then used its colonies as pure wealth extraction. Remember, these colonies were not allowed to trade with any other country. They all those resources, all that stuff went straight to the UK, and then they were only allowed to buy products from the UK. So this was not a win-win situation, and it's certainly not something that the UK today should want to replicate. But here we are. Like it's always said, Brexit was always indeed a true fantasy. But Dan has recently been going around on a blame-shifting tour, trying to shift the blame from people blaming him and his fantastic knowledge of Brexit and how things should be going right now to, well, onto someone else. And we'll find out who indeed that is. So before we do jump into this article, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel that way. So on with today's article, and this comes from the ever and always fantastic Zello Street, with the view of the world from the crew end of the telescope. I always love his tagline. And so the article is called Dan, the Blame-Shifting Man. The ever-worsening horror show that is Brexit, the stubbornly high toll of COVID infections, hospitalizations, and death, an economy that is not the fastest growing in the G7, the looming spectre of inflation, skyrocketing energy prices, worsening pollution, and, whisper it quietly, the unappealing parade of politicians prepared to lie about any or all of it, should be, and at least putting anyone excusing the current government to shame. But it doesn't. Because the alleged Prime Minister Alexander de Pfeffel Johnson can always count on someone out there in his less than stellar pantheon of supporters pulling the oldest trick in the inept politician's book. And of course, blaming someone else. So it has come to pass as the increasingly desperate down-market Telegraph has given a platform to the very much discredited Europhile Dan, the oratory man, to play the let's blame anyone but bozo. He says, our problems stem from a useless civil service, but We prefer to blame ministers, he begins, then saying the same thing but with different words. Through the administrative state, it is plainly failing in its duties. Nobody is being held to account except our beleaguered politicians. We should take Hanan on trust without any evidence. No, but indeed, do go on. No one pays attention to the failing officials, except insofar as they can somehow be pinned on politicians. That's the same thing in 3 times. Let's have another go. The current row over lockdown violations, for example, it largely involves civil servants. No, they involve Bozo and his pals breaking their own laws while the rest of us obeyed them. But if at first you don't succeed, well, then stuck on some more seed. Yet, from the headlines, you might think that the Prime Minister was the only name in the frame. It seems true for the kerfuffle about evacuating animals from Kabul, because Bozo paw prints are all over the evacuation of the animals from Kabul. He made the decision. Would Sir like to have another biscuit in no style at all while writing his own private healthcare hobby horse? Keeping politicians on the wrong can indeed require mental contradictions. During the first lockdown, commentators raged about our inability to get enough private protective equipment, ventilators, or even tests. These failures were largely the responsibility of the Public Health England and the NHS. The Tory cronyism and dodgy contracts awards, nah, let's look over there instead. And of course, more examples of the Olympic standards whoppers of development. We cling to the image of a Rolls-Royce civil service, but in truth, its best days are behind it. Contrast to a recent example, our failure on the PPE and testing with our own success on vaccine phrases. The difference was that while the former was left in the very lumbering official agencies, the latter was deliberately taken out of their hands and given to Kate Billingham and from the private sector. This is, of course, just Fantasy Island stuff, and it's very significantly dishonest. But Dan wants us to know that the civil service has an ideology. And oh no, please don't laugh. Considerations such as merit, efficiency, and value for money are downgraded as incentives are then measured by the gauge of what is called diversity, which in Whitehall means people who look different but think the same. And of course, finally, the true culprit is found. Yes, it's diversity that's gone and done it, or preferred pronouns, or the LGBT quotas. At least Hanan has not followed the tabloid herd and shouted woke. But this is indeed lame stuff. Ministers make the decisions and therefore carry the can, including on the lockdown busting. That's really all there is to it. And again, it doesn't surprise me actually if we will actually see more of this. Most of the far-right libertarians like Daniel Hanan, the free market fundamentalists, are desperate to shrink the size of the state. So that means, again, attacking the NHS and indeed attacking the civil service because, well, we've got all these civil servants around anywhere. They're just wasting money. Let's just, cut them. And then an office that maybe had 100 civil servants to do a job now is only left with 20 to do the job where it once took 100 to do. That's perfectly fine, isn't it? Again, you can see the plans coming a mile away. And of course, Danny here is trying to blame others for, again, the government's own failings. Ministers set the ship. They dictate to the civil servants what is happening. And then the civil servants carry out the laws and the rules and the code of what the particular ministers are dictating to them. It is not the civil service here at fault, as much as Dan is trying to once again shift the blame. Like I say, it's classic Daniel Hanan here. If we were still in the EU, by the way, Daniel would be blaming the EU, not the civil service. Of course, as was the case with all these Brexiteers, the EU was the evil to blame for all of Britain's woes. And now, of course, we're no longer in the EU. They can't really blame the EU for all of these failings. It has to be something else except us. Because, after all our plans and the ideology should be working, except it's not. So instead of actually looking at their ideas and even themselves, well, clearly it's that bloke over there. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can always, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.